Hello, I'm James Cridland, the radio futurologist, and every week I write a newsletter all about international radio trends, and you're listening to the podcast version of it where I read it out for lazy people. This week, the Infinite Dial 2021 UK study came out. I mentioned last time why I was so excited about it, and it didn't disappoint. There's a 60-page PDF and a video presentation on Edison Research's website. For radio, weekly listening in the UK is higher than any of the other Infinite Dial countries of Canada, the US, and Australia. And I wonder whether why, basically. It'd be interesting to speculate. Is it the existence of a strong and well-funded public service broadcaster? I think it might be. None of the other surveyed countries have a public broadcaster even approaching 25% weekly market share, much less the 50% that the BBC enjoys. It might be something to do with the incredible choice that you get on DAB, perhaps, as well, as Matt Deegan has said in a newsletter that came out after I sent mine. So, yeah, really interesting to see radio doing so well, and interesting, too, to see podcasting doing so well. 41% of people in the UK, aged 16 or over, listen to podcasts every month. That's the same number as the US. The weekly figure is 25%, which is a little lower than the US's 29%. And to me, I think that's about right in terms of gut feel. One of the challenges of podcast measurement in the UK is the existence of something called Listen Again, which is offered in the main by the BBC and Global. Now, that is typically, Listen Again is typically access to a radio show on demand. And it's different for a radio broadcaster in terms of music rights, but indistinguishable from a podcast for the consumer. Now, RAJAR collects and reports them as different things in its research because it's owned by the radio companies, and the radio companies need to prove to the record companies that, oh no, we've got all these people using the Listen Again service and blah, blah, blah. But the Infinite Dial doesn't do that. You would presume that that must lead to some sort of confusion. Because, I mean, for example, I can listen to The Archers as a piece of Listen Again radio. I can also listen to it as a podcast, after all. And when I worked for Pure, the internet radio manufacturer, in 2010, I really wanted to merge those two, Listen Again and podcasting. It wasn't to be, and it ended up being quite difficult. I've got a text message. That's exciting. Incidentally, this research also says 22% of people in the UK say that they don't own a radio at all. It's more than 1 in 5. Adam Bowie has also written a good write-up with lots of details. You'll find it at adambowie.com. Adam's post, like the study itself, is well worth a read. Now, BBC Local Radio. It's now called Local BBC Radio for some reason. And I linked to a story which contains an excerpt from a press release, and that uses the phrase local BBC radio 20 times. It's clearly something that they're quite proud of, and they would like us all to remember. Local BBC radio. Christmas, as anyone who's had the pleasure of being on air on Christmas Day morning knows, is a time when listeners particularly love listening to their friends on the radio. So many telephone calls on Christmas morning, and radio presenters can break format, they can be a companion to many, and especially elderly people who can otherwise be quite lonely and quite depressed on what we're told is a special day. But this year, local BBC Radio, that's BBC Local Radio, is sending their listeners to Coventry, quite literally. They're taking a religious ceremony from Coventry Cathedral on Christmas morning. Now, there's a similar service on BBC Radio 4 that morning, another on BBC Radio 3 in the afternoon, and 2 hours of gospel on BBC Radio 2 in the morning, but that's clearly not enough, so listeners to BBC Radio Cumbria will enjoy a service from 245 miles away on local BBC Radio. It's not just Christmas morning. Local BBC Radio, all of the radio stations, will also be playing clips recorded at BBC Radio London of Ed Sheeran, born in Halifax in West Yorkshire, some clips recorded in London by Katie Mellower, born in Georgia, a network show called Together for Christmas, where BBC Radio Humberside listeners will presumably enjoy a family from Cornwall doing a Zoom call with some faraway relatives, and this is brilliant, a concert with the BBC Philharmonic Orchestra and 2 children's puppets in the shape of dogs called Hacker and Dodge. That piece of excellent award-winning radio, because there's nothing better than puppets on the radio, is there, is scheduled at 9 in the evening on Christmas Eve. It's up against Top Gear on the telly. Top Gear or two puppets and an orchestra. Now, the BBC already operates 10 national radio services. They not only seem to want local BBC radio to be not local at all, they also appear to have forgotten the very point of it. And I think it's a bit of a shame, to be quite frank. Centuries of Sound is a lovely idea. It's a mix of original recorded music, original recorded audio, I should say, for every year. I link to the latest in my newsletter from 1939. Spoiler alert, in hour 3, some sort of world war starts. Who knew? Anyway, it's worth a listen. Sounds of the 20th century was quite similar. It's not quite the same, and I wonder if it's interesting to radio broadcasters. I wondered. And of course, Cambridge 105, the community radio station there, said, we've been broadcasting this every month for the last year. So congratulations to Cambridge 105. I did know that. My suspicion was that other radio broadcasters might like that too. But thank you, Cambridge 105, for getting in touch. Today, the flagship programme on the BBC's flagship station, BBC Radio 4, fell off air last week after a loud alarm went off during the programme. Listeners were treated to a bit of silence, followed by a pre-recorded emergency tape. I'm really quite curious why the procedure isn't to fade out BBC Radio 5 Live, which is normally broadcasting from many hundreds of miles away. And so therefore, you'd have thought would be available and could do something rather more appropriate than an emergency tape, but at least acknowledge the issue on the air. That apparently isn't the procedure. I'm also told that the alarms, variously, I'm told by one person that is very familiar with the situation, that the alarms went wrong and made noises when they shouldn't have done, and by somebody else who also claims that he's very familiar with this situation, that everything worked exactly as planned. And apparently that's what you do if you have a flagship programme on the BBC. You allow very loud alarms to go off without any warning in the studio during a live programme. Well done, BBC. Now, if you're wondering how DAB is currently being used in Brisbane, I sent Wonot DAB, which is a fascinating website for about 4 people, about bit rates and error protection levels and everything else. Might put my Cambridge 105 voice again for this. Anyway, I sent them my latest updates about what's going on here. Loads of low bitrate radio stations, some of them, in fact most of them, sound really good, even though they are low bitrate. There's something to do with the Australian way of using DAB Plus that I don't fully understand. I wrote something about it being parametric stereo while the UK uses joint stereo, but that's, I discover, nonsense. So I'm trying to understand a little bit more about that and see if I can work out why the UK version of DAB Plus sounds a bit more metallic than the Australian version. There's probably a good reason. And if you do have a suggestion for an SDI USB stick for a Mac, if they even exist, then I would love to know that, or indeed one for a Raspberry Pi. That might be quite fun too. A story from Pod News, which I copied and pasted into here because, why not? After dismal audience figures, the all-podcast radio format has been dropped by iHeartRadio from its 2 AM radio stations, KABQ Albuquerque in favour of Christmas music and WSAN in Bethlehem in favour of oldies, which is surely the wrong way round. Anyway, a radio executive described these stations as poorly executed and confusing to Pod News when they launched. The mighty Kerry Jones from Alfred in Shaftesbury. iHeart-owned Inside Radio reports that both stations only managed a 0.1% market share. So one wonders why they even bothered. There is one more radio station in the US which is airing non-stop podcasts. It's iHeart Podcast 95.9 WEBG. It's a radio station which is licensed to serve a place called Mina in New York, or perhaps it's Minna, or perhaps it's Minor, who knows. Anyway, it's a place with a population of 1,016. But it is audible in parts of Erie in Philadelphia, which has a massive population of 94,000 people. So iHeart Podcast 95.9, probably spending more money on its FM transmission that it earns in terms of advertising. Who knows? But anyway, it's there and it's still going. And this isn't a failure of podcasts on the radio at all. Let me read you a little bit from what Kerry Jones was saying. They are so poorly executed. Who in their right minds would listen to a radio station where each hour a podcast is used as a filler and faded mid-sentence for ads? The news then fades in mid-story when the previous ad or promo has ended. A new podcast starts, plays for a few minutes, and then just stops for ads to appear. The podcast restarts. It's hard to listen to. It's confusing. It's breathless and relentless. You don't know what to expect or when. Yeah, exactly. There is a radio station in London, which is called Podcast Radio, which I believe is very good, not least because I'm on it. But yes, well worth a listen, and perhaps these aren't, or indeed weren't. Talking about US radio, Brian Gongle asks why there isn't a working from home radio format. I link to his posts. And Tim Eby looks at NPR and wonders whether the relationship between NPR and member stations is a little strained. NPR, it seems to me, as somebody that's just peeking into this, is a prime definition of if anyone asks you how to set up a public radio system, don't do it this way. It seems the most complicated way to run anything. And frankly, it's astonishing that it works at all, so far as I'm concerned. But still, there we are. Thank you to Phil Riley for kindly buying the coffees this week. He's founder of Boom Radio. He's also former chief executive of Chrysalis Radio, former chief executive of Free Radio, and a former graduate trainee at BRMB. He's a man who understands the business of radio better than most, and it's a privilege to have his support. So thank you, Phil. Also, thank you to Will Jenkins for buying the coffees as well. Will is a voiceover. He has sold nice houses in Toronto, promoted the UEFA Cup Champions League final in Israel, and taught the Japanese how to care for their bonsai trees, which is very clever. Thank you, Will. I appreciate that. That's kind of you. Thank you also to Richard Hilton and Brunn Audio Consulting for your ongoing support of this newsletter. I'm very grateful to you. If you'd like to, you can support my work by going to buymeacoffee.com/James Cridland. You can become a member to give regularly or just give a one-off coffee or 5. It's buymeacoffee.com/James Cridland. Or if you're feeling particularly fancy, you can press the boost button in your podcast app if you're running a decent new podcast app, like a couple of people have, which is very exciting. Adam Curry, the Podfather, yes, that Adam Curry, gave me 1,000 sats, saying boosting for car radio. A sat, by the way, is a kind of bit of cryptocurrency. It's a small amount of a Bitcoin. So Adam, thank you very much for that. Dave Jones has given me a Rush Boost, which is 2,112 sats. And he says, I read the Radio Futurologist newsletter and listen to the podcast, even though I'm not a radio guy. I listen mostly for your delivery. You're a very listenable fellow. And he's American as well. So there's a thing. Dave, thank you so much. I appreciate that. If you do have a boost button in your podcast app, then hold it down and send a message to me. That would be lovely. And if you don't, you should go and find yourself a better podcast app at podnews.net/new podcast apps. That's podnews.net/new podcast apps. So thank you for doing that. My professional website has more details about who I am and what I do and whether I can help you further. You'll find that at james.cridland.net. Looking forward to actually finally getting on a plane soon. In March, going to Podcast Movement Evolutions in Los Angeles. And in May, going to Radio Days Europe in Malmö in Sweden. Is it Malmö or Malmö? Don't know. Anyway, in Sweden, perhaps somebody might tell me if there's indeed anybody listening 14 minutes and 20 seconds in. Or you can, oh yes, and then I'm going to the podcast show, which is in London, also in May in London. I'm looking forward to that as well. And hopefully speaking at more things too. The Queenslanders have just opened up the border. In fact, the border's not quite open yet. It's open, I think it's open next week. So I'll be able to fly somewhere, but if I fly back into this country, then I'll have to spend 2 weeks in home quarantine, along with the rest of the family, who wouldn't thank me for that. But the borders are supposed to be opened fully in mid-January when we all hit 90%. So, yeah, good luck with that. Anyway, that's probably enough from me. So thank you very much, and keep listening.